This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
The May chaos is rapidly ensuing. Got a lot of big stuff happening this weekend, including a decent bit of travel, which I am looking forward to in the sense that it gives me an opportunity to get out of Pittsburgh for a little bit. You live in one area your whole entire life. At some point you wake up one day and you're just like, yeah, it'd be kind of nice to hit the road and see some actual life form outside your own hometown. That's a cool part of the summer, I guess. Weather's good. It's time when everybody plans the big getaways and the superb vacations. Yeah. You know, I'm more so the kind of guy that could have an entire vacation composed of traveling like 5 hours to one state, do a couple small things on the side, and then be perfectly content. I don't need beaches. I don't need slot machines. I don't need loud, obnoxious party scenes. Just put me out in an open field in front of some cows and some farmland. That'll put me in a decent mood for a little bit. But I guess we're not here to talk about that, are we? While I'm sure everybody would love to hear a conversation about summer trips. Now, let's get into the meat of today's show. I am going to be busy over the next couple days, so I'm not going to have a whole lot of time this weekend to prep for the Monday podcast. I'll still manage to find time, but it's going to be a bit of a challenge. Luckily, there's nothing too big going on this weekend. For today's agenda, we have the standard Friday show, Dynamite Report, a couple classic reviews we're going to get through, and those actually probably won't take all that long. Those are relatively shorter programs this week, so maybe we will actually manage to fire through this one in under 2 hours. Boy, we can only pray, right? As if anybody actually sticks around to watch the entire 2-hour show. Now, trust me, I check out those analytics occasionally, and yeah, I can do the math. But here's the real question. When it comes to the AEW discussion for the week, do I want to spend an hour and a half ranting on the Dynamite program, or do I maybe want to spend a little more time covering the fallout from the big announcement that is one of multiple big announcements that AEW has made in just the last 2 months alone? Oh, but this time, it counts. And, well, I went back and forth with it, and I figured, why not? Been a while since I've strayed away from the formula of running down the entire show segment by segment. Gets a little boring, a little dry when we recap everything from top to bottom without any spice or variety. And since this announcement is actually something that I would consider a relatively big deal, more so I think than the Wembley show they're about to run later this summer, I'm going to start with that discussion, and then we'll sort of proceed with the rest of the Dynamite Report as such. So this big announcement, eh? What was the big announcement? Well, turns out it was mostly news that we were already sort of spoon-fed beforehand. In fact, the AEW Collision pilot episode will take place on Saturday, June 17th, and as far as I know, I don't believe Tony actually indicated a location or venue as to where that show will be happening. Why, I have no idea. I guess in order to keep people speculating on whether or not it'll be in Chicago. And the other thing, I guess, if you even want to call it additional announcements, He then briefly glossed over a series of subsequent tapings that they will also be doing for AEW Collision at buildings that have already been announced. So in other words, if I'm trying to make all this sound remotely comprehensible, AEW Collision's debut episode will be happening on June 17th at a venue to be announced. They apparently still have not finalized that, even though it is the first episode. But they do, in fact, already have bookings for upcoming Collision shows for tapings at venues that will be happening after the pilot episode. Now again, is this being done deliberately to keep the CM Punk return under wraps? Possibly. Although, I'll just let you in on a little secret here, Tony. You know, at some point, you are going to have to announce where that show is happening. And the moment you say that it's taking place in Chicago, the cat is already going to be out of the bag. Whether or not you would have announced it here versus, I don't know, say 3 weeks from now, it's not going to make any difference. So I don't really understand the thought process behind it. Just announce you're going to be in Chicago. Even if you didn't want to specifically name drop Punk in the equation, fine. You didn't have to. But at least people know where the show's going to be taking place for the launch premiere. God forbid they want to know in advance whether or not it's worth investing to buy a ticket or not. Aside from that, though, that's all there really was to it. And while I said this was a relatively big deal, despite the piss-poor way that Tony handled talking about it here, I do mean that. At least I can confidently say that this Collision show, it has a chance to be a big deal. And there's basically a few ways to interpret how this Saturday show fares for AEW in both the short and the long term. Does the show wind up just being another failed experiment like the Rampage show is currently on Friday night? Or will Tony actually take this as a learning opportunity to bring CM Punk back and sort of let him guide the booking and agenting aspect of what we see on the Saturday show? Because I've said this before, we see what happens when you let the inmates run the asylum in AEW. When you give guys like Jericho and the Elite the book, and you let them have free reign to do whatever the fuck they want, you get garbage like what happened with their material this week. There are certain guys that, despite them having years of ring experience, it doesn't mean that you should necessarily grant them the power to handle their own storylines. Especially the ones that are a little too open-minded about all the modern indie stuff we normally see. Guys like Jericho, guys like the Beta Bucks and Omega, guys like Moxley, guys that have no self-control. Those are the people you should never permit to be in any kind of booking or agenting position. When it comes to Punk, that's a guy that I would be confident in letting oversee a television format. We saw what the shows were like when CM Punk was managing the fort. When he was in charge of running his own storylines, 99% of the time, it was the best stuff on the show. If he's working side by side with Tony and he's pointing out things that would work versus things that won't, if he and Tony are exclusively working to separate the wheat from the chaff, making sure the people working the Collision show are actually valuable accommodations, if we're still going to operate in this post-Punk versus post-Elite camp, then let's just go ahead and separate the two categories. Divide up the roster. The Dynamite show can keep the Elite and all their friends, the people that enjoy all that stuff, they can keep salivating over that for the Wednesday programs. And then on Saturdays, you let the pro wrestlers get a fair shake for a change. Because I'll tell you this, man, I've talked about it before, but I need something to reinvigorate my interest with this product. AEW's been a rotten show for way too long now, and the absence of Punk has created a huge hole in that. Whether or not people want to admit this or not, they need Punk back in more ways than one. And if we're all in agreement that the Elite doesn't want to do business with Punk and FTR, if that six-man tag is forever off the table because Omega and the Bucks are too much of pussies to swallow their own pride, then fine. Keep them separated. But let the actual star power in AEW get a chance to get spotlighted fairly on the Saturday show. And we'll just have a partial brand split of sorts, with the two opposing parties working the separate programs. With all the infighting and all the drama that's been going on over the last year plus with AEW, if Tony's not going to step in to try to get everybody on the same page, then why not just divide everybody up? At this point, it might not be a bad investment. The lack of leadership in this company it's beyond ridiculous. But if Tony's not going to be the boss, if he's not going to step in and tell everybody to work under the same umbrella and just deal with it, to do business professionally and act like grown-ass adults, well, we can go with Plan B. I don't think this needs to be a case where we see guys working both programs every week. I think guys need to be exclusive to either show. Just figure out who's going to wrestle where and just settle on that for the time being. Now, of course, how that reflects with the whole ratings discussion, we can have that conversation later on, because I've already talked about how Saturday is traditionally a bad night to run wrestling, much less run television, period. I mean, you're always going to have that problem running wrestling on the weekend. But I'll say this, man. These Dynamite numbers are hovering in that same range from week to week, and it doesn't look like they're doing anything that are going to boost people's hopes. But if people tune into that pilot show on Saturday in about a month, and they see Punk back, they see some names that we haven't seen get a fair shake on Dynamite in a long time, and it starts to look like the Saturday program might be worth people's investment, what's that going to leave Dynamite with? The cult elite fan base that's going to watch regardless of how good or bad the show is? And what's that number, truly? 600,000? 700,000 people? If Dynamite starts to dip around that 700,000 number consistently, they're going to run into some problems. It's just going to give more people incentive to check out of the Dynamite show altogether because of how horrible it is most weeks. Think about how many people you lost when the Punk drama went down. What is that, something like 200,000 people? They just never came back? When they saw that Punk wasn't going to be back in the equation, they didn't stick around. They said, nah, fuck this, I'm good. I'll watch something else. And because they're trying to keep the Punk stuff under the radar right now, what happens if he actually returns on the Collision show in June? Most people, I think, are going to be intrigued. They'll stick around to watch the Saturday show before they ever consider watching the Wednesday show again. They certainly won't be hitting the average million viewers like they were hitting on Dynamite about a year or so ago. But they might actually be able to take away some of the people that are watching Dynamite right now. AEW has its core audience already, but there are still a lot of frustrated AEW watchers out there that want to tune in to see the good stuff when it happens. And because it only usually comes in moderation with a hand-select group of names, factor in FTR, MJF, Ricky Starks, etc., what do you do with those guys if they all end up going over to the Saturday show? What does that leave Dynamite with? It leaves them with the core audience. And whether or not people want to realize this or not, it's not as big of a number as a lot of people think it is. It's really not. So while this announcement wasn't particularly groundbreaking with the way Tony conducted it here, it's still a potentially big deal in the overall scope of where it could land AEW's viewership numbers in the future. I mean, you may even still have the same average number of people watching weekly, but it'll just be deviated between the two shows more or less. Now, granted, this is all speculative thinking right now, but I just hope they plan on actually announcing something to get people to want to even check the show out, period. whether or not it's the Punk return, a big title match, a major segment, a big debut, whatever. But they need a hooking point. And with the way they announced this here on the show, they really didn't give people a whole lot of incentive to check it out. You know, they need something beyond, hey folks, another television show that you should add to your weekly watch list. Because that shit ain't going to fly. No one's going to watch Collision because it's a fresh show. You need a rationale for people to want to check that out. So I'm still waiting on that. But it's leaving me curious. And for AEW, I consider that a milestone. Curiosity is better than me watching the show every week and realizing, yeah, the shit still sucks. Here I sit. I'm watching Dynamite. It's not getting any better. It's not really even getting any worse. It's just flatlined in terms of its mediocrity. Now, in terms of the way they actually started the show, we had sockless loafer Wardlow come out to... I can't even really say he did a promo. He said about 2 sentences and then told Christian Cage to literally come out and spit in his face. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. It's one of those lines that probably sounded good in his head. In delivery, it did not work at all. So, here come Christian Cage and the Dinosaur. Well, first they get into the ring so Christian and Wardlow can have a back and forth verbal jousting match. And then Christian goes to hack a loogie up so he can, I guess, proceed forward with spitting in Wardlow's face as he requested. So, Wardlow grabs Christian by the throat, and you'll never guess what it led to. Literally 3 minutes into the show, and one of AEW's most overplayed cards, the friggin' brawl angle. Can't ever get enough of those in a given week, can we? And this one was particularly abhorrent because it wasn't even a good brawl. I mean, I only wrote down a handful of gaffes that took place during this fight, but here are some in particular that stood out to me. Horrible sloppy punch exchanges by Wardlow and the Dinosaur. Wardlow leisurely going to try to set up Christian for a powerbomb while the Dinosaur is just sort of leaning in the corner, barely even selling. Just standing there patiently waiting for Wardlow to get Christian in position so he can cut him off. Of course, they had to get a ladder involved. So when Christian goes to hit Wardlow with it, Wardlow has clearly not been properly trained to learn how to take a proper bump with it. So when he goes to throw his hands up, it's 100% obvious that the ladder just hit his hands. And then he just sort of fell backwards and sold his head. Those are just standout issues. I'm sure I could rattle off like 27 more if I wanted to make this another hour Broadway discussion. But for the sake of just moving on with things, I will conclude my report with the following. I still do not care about this feud. This did no favors in amping up my already lackluster enthusiasm. And aside from Wardlow needing to wear socks with dress shoes going forward, someone also needs to tell Christian that wearing Chelsea boots with ankle socks and or no socks. No go. Do not do that. Horrible wardrobe violation. So from there, in a surefire way to keep the ratings up on the show, someone thought it would be a good idea to book the following TV match. The company mascot and Darby Allin versus Lee Moriarty and Big Bill. Right. Because when I think of guys I'm looking to feature on my wrestling show in order to keep the viewers up, the guy that I first think to put on camera is Big Bill. Big Bill. Yeah. Who would ever think to flip the channel whenever Big Bill is wrestling? Not me. Nah, man, that guy's fucking money. We ought to be campaigning for a hashtag Big Dollar Bill. Let Tony Khan hear your voices loud and clear, people. Let's get that baby tweeting and twattering and twitching ASAP. Ridiculous. So obviously, given the astronomical surge in sarcasm, you'd probably be able to venture a guess that I skipped over this match. And you would be correct in that assessment. And while a lot of you might think it has a lot to do with Big Bill, you also have the company mascot involved here. And I'm also currently riding the anti-Orange Cassidy train. I've had enough of the incessant force of this fucking clown every week on this show. I mean, the act isn't even worth me getting bent out of shape over anymore. Rather, I'm just going to save my breath and fast forward through all of this shit. Better me not waste my time and yours by ranting about the same old crap. Because that's all it is at this point. It's the same old crap with this idiot. So instead, I will quickly gloss over the next match because, well, point blank, there wasn't much to say about it. Sammy Guevara wrestled some geek named Exodus Prime. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it went 20 seconds and Guevara won with the GTH. Don't really have a problem with that. Christ almighty, an AEW squash is almost a breath of fucking fresh air. I expected this thing to go like 15 minutes through commercial with the way Tony Khan books most of his matches. But they had Guevara beat him in short order as it needed to happen. And then, to my utter surprise, he actually did a fairly good promo afterwards. Again, short and sweet to the point. Probably went like 45 seconds, if that. He said he's traveled up and down the roads throughout Texas to get to AEW. He's made a lot of wrong decisions in his life. Word. But the one thing he's never listened to is all the doubters, all the haters, all the black pill doomers that told Sammy he would never make it and he would never amount to anything in the business. Didn't know he was referencing me all of a sudden. Not that I plan on rescinding any of my comments about his future because, well, I stand by those. But he concluded by saying that he's going to prove everybody wrong when he becomes the AEW World Champion on May 28th at Double or Nothing. And, you know, by the time it was all over, despite the fact that I know for a fact that Sammy Guevara is not winning the AEW World Championship, and normally I would say that it's probably not wise for babyfaces to make promises that they cannot then capitalize on. With that said, once we also got past the apparent question of, is this fucking guy supposed to be a face or a heel? And it's impossible to tell with Sammy because he flip-flops depending on whether or not the sun is shining. Once you remove everything I just mentioned from the equation, yeah, it was a damn good promo. It had the vibe of one of those old school confident babyface promos that he's just trying to sell people on an upcoming title match. You know, take out Sammy needlessly dropping the word shit in there for no reason. This would have fit right in there with one of those Crockett TV promos from the 80s. It was very simple, very basic. It's not winning promo of the year or anything, but it's one of the better promos we've seen with the Four Pillars saga. Most of the story has sucked a mass cock since the beginning. I'm not sure if this promo did enough to reconcile any of that, but surely didn't hurt. So I give it a solid thumbs up. I wish they'd maybe spent a little more time doing this kind of stuff in the last month instead of having these guys mumble and mutter back and forth like a bunch of 9-year-old boys. Instead, everything had to be a childish game of them going out there and talking about who has the bigger dick size. And it's all been horrible. Speaking of horrible, this goddamn mess of an AEW tag title feud. My God, is this stuff bad. They almost made up for how awful it's been with a legendary moment that took place here with the Kali bootleg. It almost saved this entire program. So first off, we had Tony Schiavone introducing Jarrett Lethal, Satnam, and, quote, Sanjay, dude! And because Taz just totally doesn't give a fuck at this point, this of course got a pop out of him, and he even utters into the headset Tony's weird pronunciation of Sanjay, dude! And it was kind of humorous. But the real humor comes with what happened about 20 seconds later. Here come the challengers. Lethal's on the microphone from the rampway telling Shivani to shut his mouth and piss up a rope, basically. And while the heels are casually strolling out, from literally out of nowhere, and I had to watch this back because it totally caught me off guard the first time I saw it. While the heels are totally not paying attention, here come FTR from the other side of Gorilla, and they sneak up on the Kali bootleg while he's not looking, and I mean, I died watching this. It's hard to even explain what the fuck happened here. Let's just say they didn't necessarily shove Satnam Singh off the stage through a conveniently placed breakaway table. They more so gently nudged Satnam Singh off the stage through a conveniently placed breakaway table. And beyond the whole absurdity of why was this fucking breakaway table just sitting at the bottom of the stage? And how did FTR know that Satnam was going to be in that specific area so they could nudge him off the stage through said table? A table, mind you, that they would have had no idea was there if this were real. Beyond all that, it was fucking hysterical. We've seen Satnam take bumps occasionally. If I'm not mistaken, I think this may have been one of the bigger bumps we've seen the guy take in his entire run with AEW. So, of course, genius as they are, they just throw it away in a random TV angle. But it's totally obvious that Satnam never took any falls or bumps like this in his entire life. Because when he went off the stage, he wasn't even like flinging his arms in the air or anything. He literally fell off the stage like a fucking cardboard cutout. And then, boom! He goes right through the table and dies. We never see him again. Probably carted him off to the morgue the minute it was all over. And meanwhile, FTR is fighting with Lethal and Jarrett all the way down to the ring. I have no clue where the fuck Sanjay was. He just sort of vanished, which I'm not complaining about. I wish Sanjay would just vanish from the show altogether and never come back. And like, I mean, in all fairness, the brawl with everybody was fine. It's hard to really screw up ringside brawls unless you legitimately have no idea what to do in those circumstances. If we literally just didn't see a fucking brawl like 20 minutes prior with Christian and Wardlow, maybe it would have had a bigger impact. But this is one of the major AEW epidemics and nobody wants to talk about. There are way too many weekly fights and crowd brawls to the point where they all just start to blend together and none of them ever mean anything. Having one fight or one TV angle in a given week is one thing, but AEW has a habit of doing like 4 or 5 of them in a given week. At some point, you just start to tune them out and shrug. You just start to view them as ordinary parts of the program. And that's what this felt like. FTR got into a fight with the heels that are challenging them for the belts. Okay, who cares? We see brawls in virtually every segment on this show, so what made this unique? We got a great moment out of it because of the absurd bump that the Kali bootleg took. But aside from Dax ripping off Lethal slacks and him just going full-fledged Ric Flair mode for a minute there, what was so special about this fight? Nothing really. It was just a fight. Another one of their lazy ways of saying, now you should care about this title program. Hey, I'll do you one better. You know what's not going to get me to care about this title program? 3 words. Karen fucking Jarrett. That is all. I have no more words. The moment she appeared on camera, dude. I just can't. I can't even go there. I had immediate PTSD flashbacks to Impact. I said, no. No, I don't have the mental capacity to put myself through this right now. Next. And by next, I also mean we're skipping over the girls' match because that kind of goes without saying at this point. Oh, and by the way, if you care, Hikaru Shida has new theme music. It sucks. And so does AEW's women's division. So the next thing I have written down here was everything involving the Roddy Strong Chris Jericho debacle. And I don't use that term loosely. I mean, my God, where do you even start with this thing? I think I already covered a lot of my early criticisms of this match when they announced it last week. I've sort of established that they've already fucked up Roddy in AEW. It's been 3 weeks. He's already just another dork on the show. His fucking debut match on TV was part of an 8-man tag where they didn't even let him get the pin at the end of it. And now his second match in AEW is, for all intents and purposes, a garbage street fight that ended in the most anticlimactic fashion imaginable. Why in the hell anybody thought it would be a good idea to make Roddy Strong's second televised match in AEW a Falls Count Anywhere match? Beyond me. Much less his first televised singles match. And this is the environment they're putting him in. And of course, the match is rotten because it's a garbage street fight to begin with. For about the first 3 minutes, it started off perfectly fine when they were just in there wrestling. And they gave poor Roddy all of like 2 minutes to get the shine on Jericho. You know, he's going in there and doing all the classic stuff that we remember Roddy for being good for. The one thing you'll always hear people talk about when it comes to Roddy, he's one of the most remarkable athletes in the world. Not the biggest guy in size or stature, but you believe that when that guy's hitting you, it hurts. His chops look great. His strikes look great. I mean, the dude can run circles around you for hours and never get tired. The guy's cardio has always been out of this world. So, rather than play to his strengths as a wrestler, like a smart booker would do, naturally he finds himself having to face off with Jericho in a slow, plodding hardcore match. A match that A, only makes Roddy look weaker because he has to slow everything down to accommodate for Jericho's tortoise-moving ass, and B, putting Roddy in a match that doesn't play to his strengths at all because hardcore wrestling was never part of what made Roddy a great professional wrestler. This is what Tony had as an idea for when he signed Roddy to a contract. He said, let Jericho decide his fate. Because he obviously knows better than me. So by the time they come back from break and the fight is spilling out into the crowd, and watching Roddy try to pin Jericho on the aisleway steps, they're doing the classic Kevin Sullivan, Chris Benoit crowd fighting sequences up into the concession stand. I expected them to try to find their way over to a women's restroom at some point, but thankfully God spared me on that one. And of course, what makes the whole thing ridiculous is the fact that A, it's all fucking comedy spots. They're throwing gimmicks at each other, splashing water in each other's faces, literally throwing trash cans at each other. At one point, they're making jokes about the fucking ice cream mascot or whatever. They're doing hokey shit like fighting in the stairwell in really precarious areas so they can just wind up fighting back into the main hallway again. Keep in mind during all of this, this was the point where the genius play-by-play commentator Excalibur decided, now would be a good time for me to mention the passing of Billy Graham. While Roderick Strong and Chris Jericho are having a casual street fight, a comedy match nonetheless, now is the point where we should mention Billy Graham's death. Talk about being tone deaf as fuck. What a goddamn idiot that guy is. Oh, but we're not done there. Because if you thought I was done ranting about this atrocity, no, of course, amidst all this chaos and fighting going on, there's also the visual of the crowd following the fight while it is happening. That right there above all else, that is what pissed me off to no end. The fact that not only are there like 18 security guards just standing around barely lifting a finger to try and hold anybody back, but the marked fans, they're not running scared. They're not fearing for their lives. They're not concerned that they're in grave jeopardy at any point. When these two supposed athletes are having a chaotic street fight in the middle of a concession area, no, they're not worried. The whole thing's just played for laughs anyway, because the shit is fake. We all know it's a gag. So let's just play along and be part of the act. We'll follow them around and cheer them on. We'll get right into the middle of all of it. The police aren't going to do a fucking thing to stop anybody. Why would they? Just let it be a free reign where everybody gets to leisurely follow the wrestlers while this fucking match is going on. I mean, we've already exposed the business to the point of no return. Let's just let everybody else know the shit is fake. Ridiculous. Then, of course, there's the finish. Silly me. I thought they would actually might come up with something creative to get Adam Cole involved. Seeing as how their big story from last week was Jericho filing a motion to have Cole removed from the buildings going forward as long as Jericho is there. Keyword, in the building. So it was a way to swerve everybody here in this Falls Count Anywhere no DQ match, conveniently 1 week after this order was served. No, Jericho and Roddy managed to find themselves in a match where a fight could potentially spill out to the front of the building. Keyword, outside the building. And who should be waiting but Adam Cole? Just casually hanging out. No one's trying to restrain him. Nobody's there to stop him. There were like 50 security guards last week trying to kick Adam Cole out of one building. Now here he's just hanging out. Just casually strolling around the front of the building, I guess waiting for Jericho to come out. Because he apparently knew that was going to happen. Not hiding behind a park bench or waiting to tackle Jericho from out of a tree or anything. Not even taking my clever idea of maybe having Cole pop out of a dumpster and smack Jericho with a fucking beer bottle or something. No, he just casually walks up to Jericho from behind while the camera's filming him. And he looks all mean and angry. And then Cole just spins Jericho around and starts beating the crap out of him. And the fight bleeds over into some little dirt mound area so Roddy can hit Jericho with a running knee for the 3 count. After, keep in mind, Cole had already hit Jericho with a running knee to the back of the head, softening the blow for Roddy, I guess. Which is always great to see. 2 babyfaces outnumbering and beating the shit out of the one heel, so the babyfaces get the unfair advantage. Good shit. Just the way God intended. So yeah, this all ate a dick. And I expected no less. This was a tragic misuse of Roddy Strong on every level. Jericho continues to be a textbook case of the kind of veteran in the locker room you don't want to be letting oversee your programs, because every idea this guy has is the drizzling shites. And this did nothing to get me to want to see Adam Cole versus Chris Jericho at Double or Nothing. So the trend continues. I consider this segment an epic failure. And because they've now looped poor Roddy into the mix, now I basically have no rhyme or reason to give a shit about anything he's involved with. Because I know it's going to some way tie into all this Adam Cole, Chris Jericho drama. And I don't want to see that. Way to go, Tony. You managed to blow another signing. Why am I not surprised at all? And I guess because my stress levels weren't already reaching a boiling point, coming out of Falls Count Anywhere fuckery, the next scheduled match was Roosh versus Jungle Boy. And I'm just going to read you exactly what I wrote down, and you can piece everything together from there. They go to the floor within the first 15 seconds. Roosh proceeds to throw Jungle Boy into each barricade on all four corners of the ring, at which point the fight continues on the floor for well over a full minute. Came back from commercial where Jungle Boy was proceeding to get his ass handed to him. Somehow the thought hit me maybe this match should have been a squash like the Sammy Guevara match from earlier, because right now I'm not getting the sense that Jungle Boy is a strong title challenger. Out there getting his ass kicked by a guy we've seen wrestle in AEW twice in the last 8 months, both times of which he's lost. And after about another 5 minutes of me watching Jungle Boy get worked over like a fucking job guy and me asking, who the hell are they pushing here? They had Roosh get into a verbal spat with the official so that Jungle Boy could then run him from behind and stack up Roosh for a flash roll-up. At which point the heels immediately gang attack him after the bell until Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara made the save for reasons unknown, because apparently they felt sorry that one of their oppositions for the title match in 2 weeks was getting made to look like a fucking simpleton. So maybe they felt pity, who even knows. But that's good. Good to know that one of the 4 challengers for their upcoming top belt in a few weeks only managed to eke out a TV win after having to wait for a fucking ref distraction spot. That's a real smart book in there, Tony. What the hell was this? Am I totally out to lunch here, or was this like the most counterintuitive, counterproductive way to book one of their title challengers? Who thought that was a good idea? To lay out a match like this? Again, I ask, has Roosh ever won a TV match in AEW, period? Why was this match so competitive? Not even competitive. One-sided. How much offense did Jungle Boy legitimately get in here? 5%? 10%? And the finish is him getting a flash roll-up because he got lucky? Because he capitalized when the heel was looking at the referee being a dipshit? Maybe I'm missing something here, but I did not understand this match at all. I don't understand what they were thinking here. I mean, even MJF looked bewildered by the end of it. He almost made up for it when he slapped the microphone out of Renee's hand, trying to ask him another one of her stupid generic WWE interviewer questions. He should have crop dusted her when he was walking past her. Why are they paying this woman? Why the fuck is she there? Aside from being Jon Moxley's spouse, which nobody gives a crap about to begin with, outside the marks, I guess, is she not one of the biggest wastes of a contract they have going right now? My God, is her job worthless. But hey, perks to being married to people with political sway, I guess. Anything to make Tony's boys happy, I guess. On the topic of waste of contracts, Jay White wrestled again this week. At least this time they put him out there with an actual star instead of a generic indie mass job guy. The whole Jay White, Juice Robinson versus Ricky Starks feud really hasn't done much for me personally. I have no idea why they essentially blew off the big singles match on free TV like this with 1 week's promotion. I mean, we've already seen Ricky beat Juicy Fruit. I kind of figured the end game was to eventually get to Starks versus White for the pay-per-view. Apparently, they just decided to do the match on television. But I'll say this. All being equal here, despite how little I've cared about this feud since they started it, mostly in the sense that I think it's been a complete waste of Ricky Starks, coming out of that hot program with MJF earlier in the year, this ended up being a heck of a TV match by the end. The crowd farted all over the DQ finish at the end. That more so comes with the territory with the way marks have been trained to react to outcomes of wrestling matches. The weird connotation that's linked with fucked finishes being a bad thing in wrestling. It's very weird. But the match was actually pretty good. Yeah, they fought on the floor momentarily, and I bitched about that in the previous match too. But I can at least credit these guys for being smart enough to keep most of the match in the ring. They didn't spend like half the goddamn time out on the floor where it just outright buried the ref and made him look like an idiot for not being able to count either guy out. But they came back with Starks making a big fiery comeback. They did a lot of false finishes and big near falls at the end that the people got into. And I even kind of enjoyed the whole sequence with the fake outs on all the heel finish spots. There was a nice spot where Starks and White were hitting the ropes at really rapid speeds. It looked really nice and hasty. And Starks got tripped up by Juicy Fruit on the floor, and the crowd all started booing because they thought Jay was going to catch Starks with that Sister Abigail thing and beat him right there. But Starks fought out of it. Everybody came alive again. They did another fake out with White gouging at Starks' eyes, fighting out of the Rochambeau. That got a nice heat reaction. And, while the whole thing with Juice coming in with the chair was a little contrived, mostly because Starks and Juice are in there doing back and forth spots with the chair for like 20 seconds, and Paul Turner is standing there with his back turned, having to pretend like he can't hear what's going on. Like, that was kind of stupid. But Starks got a big pop when he hit Juice with the chair. Then when he hit White for the disqualification, granted the people hated the DQ, but at least in this context, I can buy that it's something Ricky would have done out of frustration. He said, "This is fucking dumb. I'm outnumbered, and I'm done with all this bullshit. There's a chair here, so I'm going to use it as my equalizer, and I'm going to beat the shit out of the heels." So he took his anger out on them, and he stood tall. If this was Mid-South Television in 1982, this segment would have blown the roof off the old Irish McNeil Boys Club. Instead, the fans kind of shat on it because they didn't get a decisive winner, which is just, well, it's dumb. But I really wasn't expecting much when they announced this match. But I didn't hate it. I'm still not really all that interested in the program. I'm also not really sure what this leads to at the pay-per-view, aside from let's potentially do another no DQ style match because we're too lazy to come up with anything creative. I mean, I'm sure it's going to lead to Starks and White again. Maybe they'll try to get Juice involved, and they might go back to the tag team formula. What the hell's going on with Shawn Spears? Wasn't he part of this equation at one point? Or did I just dream up that image in my head? Could have sworn they were showing Spears in the front row at various points during these matches, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just an idiot. Or maybe I'm just looking for more reasons to stray away from talking about the main event angle. For as short-lived as it was, did not take long for it to descend into utter dog shit. And when you take into account the participants involved, you'll see why. Okay, so let's back up a little bit here. If you recall, 7 days ago, there was a cage match in the main event with Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega, and it ended with Don Callis turning on Omega and gouging a screwdriver into his eyeball. So a week later, of course he's fine, not a scratch to be had. And while you might be asking, well, did Don at least get the chance to reaffirm why he did what he did to Kenny? Why he turned his back on him after a friendship that dated back years? No. Instead, he came out to make a bunch of obscure New Japan references and nobody understood. And then out came Omega to beat up like a row of 20 security guards until the Blackpool Combat Cucks ran down to attack Omega. And Don Callis sort of took a powder and was never seen or heard from again. And because the BCC have no other agendas in AEW aside from let's just beat the shit out of everybody, well, you'll never guess what happened. The Beta Bucks come out carrying plunder and all kinds of usual hardware. They're doing their pussy boy selling where they're grabbing at body limbs, but it's obvious nothing's wrong with them. It's like the Weasley, ow, my wrist kind of selling. They're phonier than fucking football bats, the collective unit of them. And of course with Excalibur sitting there on commentary going, oh, well, this is technically still 4-on-3. The Elite are still outnumbered by one man. I wonder if there's anybody that can possibly step up to the plate to save the day. Oh my God, it's Hangman Adam Page to the rescue. Yeah, who the hell didn't see that coming? Show of hands. Now, of course, Adam Page still comes out wearing an eye patch. Now, keep in mind, he also got stabbed with a screwdriver weeks back. Meanwhile, Omega, after getting stabbed with a screwdriver 7 days ago, he's okay. He's perfectly fine. But, yeah, Adam Page, he's still got that eye patch on. So they're fighting, and they're brawling, and it sucks. And by the end of it, it was done to set up, apparently, not the War Games match. Rather, another one of AEW's all-time classic ideas, Anarchy in the Arena. For Double or Nothing. Yeah, they eliminated football fuckery and they replaced it with Anarchy in the Arena. And of course, I'm old enough to remember what happened the last time AEW did one of these Anarchy in the Arena garbage fuckfests, thanks in large part to Chris Jericho's awful input. Wasn't that the match, correct me if I'm wrong, where Bryan Danielson got severely hurt and was basically out of action for the entire summer? So now you're not only going to do that match again, even though the match sucked the first time around, but you're also going to yet again involve Danielson in it? Sounds like a genius idea. Glad I thought of it. And you know what, at this point, if Bryan Danielson is perfectly fine being involved in all this garbage, then more power to him. He's willing to accommodate with it, I guess. I thought Danielson would have known better, but apparently he has some bad habits too that have sort of fallen under the radar in the last year and are now sort of surfacing now that he doesn't have any quality opponents to work with anymore. Now, of course, for all parties involved, they're perfectly fine doing this match. Christ almighty, this is in Mox's wheelhouse. Yeah, he can go out there and get color and use all of his garbage play toys. Then he can stick around afterwards to eat all the bodily fluids and make coats out of their decomposing skin or whatever goes on in that fucking pea brain of his. Anarchy in the Arena. Literally just a surface level to say, go out there and just do whatever you want for 20 minutes. No rules. I got nothing else. That was one of the most uninspiring main event angles to a Dynamite show I remember seeing in recent memory. I mean, the 4-on-4 thing is kind of the route I expected them to go eventually, but... Okay, well then what was the point of the take-a-shit angle from weeks back? Was that to steer everybody off course and lead them astray? Getting us to think that Takeshita will eventually turn on the Elite later on? And that's probably what'll end up happening at the pay-per-view. He'll come out and do something to cost the Elite the match, and then it'll build up some kind of War Games final chapter later on. Because there's one feud that we haven't already run into the ground at this point. It's the fucking Elite versus BCC nonsense. Yeah, gotta make sure this one goes for at least another 8 interminable months. But, I mean, I don't see why they would shoot a TV angle with Takeshita and leave it open-ended unless he was going to get involved at some point. So we'll see. I don't really care what they do, but I'm just throwing it out there because I'm going by what I saw on the TV show a couple weeks ago. But that was more or less another stellar edition of mid-level all-elite wrestling. At least they managed to keep viewership above 800,000 this week. If you consider that a good thing, which I don't. Telling you boys, I'm just sort of counting down the days until this Collision show on the 17th of June. That's going to be the real deciding factor with whether or not I want to keep sticking with this horse crap Dynamite every week. If I watch that debut episode and it looks like it's going to be worth my time in comparison to these Wednesday night programs, I might just go ahead and switch over to start talking about the Collision shows, at least in the short term. Yeah, I'm a little skeptical right now considering that there's basically zero information on what's actually going to be happening on that show right now. If I tune in a few weeks and it's just more of the same thing with the Elite and the BCC and all the cesspool of indie direct that I watch every week, then I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. Cry about it for one. And then I'll just keep layering additional chapters to my Why AEW Will Always Be Mid book. I'm currently on chapter 37 right now. It's going to be a long-winded book. I'm starting to get the sense that doing a Dynamite watch-along might not be a bad idea. Just so you can all experience the torture with me. Copyright strikes, though, it's trying to avoid them at all costs. Not that this channel would really be impacted all that much. Anyway, what are we going to talk about now? What do you guys want to talk about? Actually, how about we talk about some of this Crockett TV show? Because I can give you the Cliff's Notes rundown about this show in approximately 5 seconds. This episode sucked, nothing happened, and I was bored to tears. That is all.
Hi, good night, everybody.
No, actually, that is a blatant lie. I'm totally kidding. There was one thing of major importance on the entire show. We had exactly one match on the entire program. As we mentioned before, this Saturday night episode on the Superstation only ran about an hour. And of course, when you remove commercials, they basically took everything down to about 40 minutes. So we didn't have a whole lot of time to cram in material for the week. Pretty much everything revolved around the finals of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament. We had the Midnights going up against Ron Garvin and Barry Windham later on. And as we also know, Jim Cornette was scheduled to wrestle Ron Garvin in the cage match in Charlotte around that same point. As of this current taping, he was still alive and breathing. So clearly this was taped before that onslaught went down. But we had Corny and David Crockett at the empty studio earlier that afternoon, and Cornette was talking about how his boys are training and getting ready for the big showdown. And obviously, Corny's doing the standard Heat promo, mentioning that Garvin and Windham better have their heads on straight, because the Midnights are on a mission to prove that they're the best team in the world. And this whole tournament is just a way for Corny to move one step closer to humiliating and ridding Garvin from the business altogether. There wasn't that much substance to the promo, although I did laugh at the very end. Straight out of the Vince McMahon playbook. This was so amazing. Cornette does the little Three Stooge shtick where he takes the racket and he starts trying to tickle David's chin with it. Kind of like what Curly would do as part of his comedy gag. He even did the woo-woo thing. And it was great because David Crockett was very unamused by this. So they spent like 5 to 7 seconds keeping the camera on both of them while David's looking at Jim like, what the fuck are you doing? But I just love the awkward pause in there before they cut back to the studio. Vince would have been proud. And back at the booth for more announcements, we had David and Tony doing a quick plug for the upcoming June 7th house show at the Omni in Atlanta, featuring a big 6-man showdown there. The returning Fabulous Freebirds are going to be making their return to the NWA to wrestle Flair, Luger, and Blanchard, which would be a hell of a match. Good God. Talk about A-list all-star players right there. Now, of course, we've been reviewing the Freebirds on the World Class shows, so we're well attuned to the impact they've been making in the Dallas region. In 87... Shit, now I'm trying to remember the timeline correctly. Obviously, I remember they were wrestling in the UWF under Watts, and that was right around the point where Crockett bought the UWF. So I think this would have been shortly after that buyout where they came over to work for Crockett until early 88, and then I think they went back to Dallas for a little bit. So when they showed the highlight reel to reacquaint the fans with the group, most of the video footage was the UWF material. We got that classic shot of Bill Watts laying on the mat, a bloody mess. That was from a TV angle they did in I think it was 87. May have been a year before that, now that I think of it. My memory is a little hairy right now. I'm not remembering that timeline for whatever reason. In any case, we did get the Bad Street USA music again. I mentioned it before. Man, if you weren't already sick of hearing that stuff by 1984, get ready to have that music rammed down your gullet for the next decade, complete with Michael Hayes' bad lip syncing. And while Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts don't stick around with Crockett for too long, throwing them directly into the line of fire with the Horsemen in Atlanta, it's a hell of a way to debut them. Figuring they were going to be over like God in Atlanta specifically. I hope they at least show a little bit of that footage. I can't wait for them to show up and start cutting promos on the studio shows again. That's going to be a blast of fun. So after that 2-minute pre-tape, here comes J.J. Dillon to bitch up a storm. At the same time, he's putting over every combination of the Four Horsemen, whether it's singles or tag action. Every time the Horsemen are in a position to pursue championship gold in the NWA, it's oddly convenient how the champs will be unavailable. For example, the Road Warriors going over to Japan to waste their time beating up Japs. That was almost verbatim what he said, by the way. He indeed used the term Japs in 1987. He also acknowledged the Freebirds coming in, while putting over their strengths as performers, saying that Michael Hayes is a heck of a singer. False. He's also putting over Gordy as the muscle of the group. And as for Buddy, well, he was sort of the odd man out, because JJ couldn't really think of anything to say about him. In any case, he recognized that they're tough, but they're going to be in for a rude awakening when they step into the ring with the Horsemen. Japs. I thought that slur was outdated by the 1950s. And here J.J. Dillon is in 1987, saying it on broadcast cable television. And from there, we came back for our featured singular TV match. Midnights versus Garvin and Wyndham in the finals of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament. They devoted, quite literally more than half the show to it. Pretty much lasted for the remainder of the program. And there was a lot of stuff that happened here. And, I have the notes sitting in front of me here. This was also one of those matches where, as I'm watching it unfold, I start trying to compare it to modern wrestling. And I just start asking myself, what are some of the most fundamental things that are missing from tag team wrestling today? Things that the boys just don't get. Things you just don't see anymore. And I think I figured it out. Discount any of the smaller details. The one thing that really stood out to me watching this. Do you all remember when tag team wrestling used to look like a struggle? Remember how everything used to be like bam, 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 on to the next thing. No margin for error, no downtime. Everything just moved and flowed from beginning to end. I miss those days in tag team wrestling, man. It's one of those weird adaptations I've noticed over the years. Modern tag team wrestling never has a breakneck pace to it. Sometimes you'll have a hot start, then the heels will cut off the baby faces and isolate them for 5 minutes. It'll be kind of boring, not really all that noteworthy. Then you'll have the fiery babyface comeback at the end. But the middle portions of the match, it always kind of kills the enjoyment. Even in circumstances like this match where Stan and Bobby are in there working over Ronnie and Barry, you at least have moments where the faces are trying to fight back and they're valiantly trying to reach over for the tag. They're keeping people invested in it. I don't know, maybe I'm not explaining it particularly well, but I encourage people to watch a tag team match from back in the territory days. Try to objectively compare that with what you see with modern tag team wrestling. I think you'll see what I mean. Those FTR Briscoes matches from last year were probably the closest thing that I would compare to the kind of old school tag team wrestling that I used to enjoy as a kid. That was the biggest thing I noticed about this match from start to finish. Not only was it tremendous, but it had every element of what I look for in tag team wrestling. It was paced well, they took their time building up to the key spots. Obviously, they went through a few commercial breaks, so they had plenty of time to space everything out and not rush into the comebacks. It's all Ronnie and Barry in their early goings, working over Bobby and Stan, isolating them and remaining in control. We had an early breakdown spot on the floor where all four guys are going at it momentarily, and some of the early chaos allowed for the heels to cheap shot Ronnie and start working him over. And again, by this point, we're only about a quarter of the way through the match, so they're not rushing. They're not in a hurry to let Barry get the tag and start milking the fiery comeback. It's always fun listening to David clamor for the babyfaces to make the tag when they're trying to break free from the heels. I also noted here, at one point, Bobby Eaton hit one of the best top rope leg drops I've ever seen. Just totally flawless execution. And eventually, Barry does get the big first tag. He's running amok on the heels. One of the early comeback spots included a deal where he gave Bobby Eaton about 17 fake-looking punches to the jaw. Would have made Eddie Kingston cringe, it looked so bad. It was great because Eaton just kind of leaned out and desperately tagged in Stan so he could take a breather. And Stan just kind of looked on and like, fuck this. Meanwhile, Barry's just standing his ground with his fist clutched, calling for Stan to get in there and fight him like a man. And of course, we come back from another break and we see Wyndham hitting Eaton with a superplex from the middle rope. David Crockett immediately sharded himself with exhilaration. And again, the thing I talk about with these elongated TV matches, looking like the boys are legitimately in a long fight, they're selling the fatigue. They've been in there a while. It's been a brutal back and forth match since the opening bell. They're tired, they're exhausted, but they're fighting through the pain. And that's another thing I miss about these matches from back in the day, man. Making the matches look as realistic as possible with selling and conveying exhaustion, letting us know how important this match is to both teams involved. There's a spot where Barry came off the top rope to trying to give Bobby a double axe handle, and I'm not entirely sure what happened here, but it looked like Barry tweaked his right knee on the landing because he immediately went down selling. And of course, the heels worked over that for a brief period. By the time we come back for our final commercial, everybody's basically fighting on low energy mode. You had beautiful Bobby going up and missing a big elbow drop. Barry goes over and gets the tag to Ronnie. And now it's Ronnie's chance to feed for the big save. And I do want to point this out too before we get to the finishing sequence. Some of the subtle things Cornette did in this match, it just goes to show why he's one of the greatest heel managers of all time. Beyond the regular facials and all the usual stuff he does and makes him good, there was a spot at one point where Barry was down and Bobby was kind of stalling and waiting around. So Cornette literally shoved Bobby by his ass to have him go over and make the cover. I thought, that's a hell of a way to keep your boys on their game. Giving him a literal nudge on the ass. That'll do the trick. But this finishing sequence was so epic. Breaks down with all four guys. You get the studio wide shot so he can catch everything in the frame. Ronnie's out on the floor chasing Cornette around the ring, trying to hit him with the tennis racket. You got Barry laying out Bobby in the ring. Teddy Long, I have no idea what the fuck happened to him, but he sort of just took a phantom bump at one point and died. And while Ronnie's chasing Corny around the ring, right as he goes to circle back to the front, there's Barry in waiting. And he immediately grabs Cornette and puts him in a sleeper. And meanwhile, Ronnie gets back into the ring to try to go after Bobby. But that's when Stan comes in the back door and smacks Ronnie with a chair, lays him out cold. And meanwhile, I'm laughing my ass off because while all this bedlam is happening, heels are about to score the pin and win the belts. I'm looking down at the bottom of the frame, and there's Cornette in his fucking pink suit, sprawled out in dead man's position, completely unconscious. I think what made it more hilarious is the simple fact that At the point Stan hit Ronnie with the chair, Stan is approximately 5 to 10 feet away from Cornette, who, mind you, is getting choked out in a sleeper hold. But Stan is just totally ignoring that, so he can hit Ronnie with a chair. I'm sitting there like, dude, turn your head to the right. Your fucking heel manager is getting killed right in front of you. Then Barry kills Cornette and Stan just runs right past him. He's like, whoops, let me step over this dead body here so we can win our tag belts. Fuck that manager on the floor. It was so hokey, but at the same time, I loved it. And I'll return to the topic in just a minute here, but I had to point this out too. Approximately within 10 seconds of them declaring the Midnight Express the new United States Tag Team Champions, it is immediately to the back for a Ric Flair pre-tape. Felt like something I would have seen on an episode of TNA from back in the day where they shoot a big angle in the ring, and then immediately it is to a pre-taped interview, having nothing to do with the big angle we just saw. That's some classic Impact footage right there. And what the fuck is going on outside? Oh my God. Well, and anyway, we come back for our closing promo angle at the booth. Absent from the picture at first was Jim Cornette, who was apparently still night-night from the previous match. So, of course, here to carry the load for the promo was Sweet Stan. And, of course, him and Beautiful Bobby are still totally blown up from the previous match, sweating like pigs, totally out of breath. But Stan's doing the rah-rah heel promo, putting over how they did what they said they were going to do, and now there's no doubt that they're the best team in the National Wrestling Alliance. I did like that he referred to the Superstation as the Super Channel. That was wonderful. And, well, right before they went to show the replay, after Stan hijacked the microphone from Tony and told him to go piss up a rope, David Crockett then pitched to the production truck to show the full replay. And I believe Stan said, and I quote, "Time to show the world what two Christian athletes are capable of." What a fucking smug line. And, well, they didn't show the whole match. Probably the last 3 or so minutes. We got to relive the closing angle at the end, which was fun seeing. And then to round it out, here comes broken, battered, and unkempt Jim Cornette to boast about how awesome his boys are. Jacked up tie and all, but he's still out there gloating, saying that the Midnights proved that they were the best. Ronnie and Barry gave it their all, and they still couldn't get the job done. Everything the Midnights have thrown at Ronnie, including costing them the belts on TV a couple months back, now they've come full circle with Eaton and Lane stealing the belts from them, from right under their nose. And, well, first, he told Ronnie to go pick up a new profession, like selling used cars. And then Cornette stuck his tongue out and went, eh. And then Tony looked flabbergasted. And after the heels left, Tony threw in one last jab by going, "Well, the Midnights are your new U.S. Tag Team Champions now." Cornette doesn't remember it, though, because he was asleep. I like when Tony used to give subtle jabs back in the day. Now he's just insufferable and annoying. It's crazy, dude. The comparison between AEW Tony Schiavone and Crockett Tony Schiavone, it's like otherworldly. They're not even remotely compatible. But that was all good. And I guess because they needed to kill another couple minutes of TV time by the end there, they went back and showed the replay again. You know, just in case we weren't paying attention the first 2 times. And aside from David and Tony being bummed about the title decision, kind of like how I joked at the beginning, this was pretty much a one-note show. I love that match for every reason I covered earlier. And considering the shorter runtime, it's a show that I highly recommend anybody check out if you have 45 minutes to kill on a weekend. You won't be disappointed. You know, it's obviously a critical moment in the timeline of Crockett Promotions in '87. And with the Midnights as the new U.S. Tag Team Champions, those are belts I think they hold on to for well over a year, if I'm not mistaken. I think until early summer of 88, right? When did the Fantastics debut? Is that spring of 88? Somewhere in that period? But they hold on to the belts for a while. And that was one of Dusty's mottos when he created the titles to begin with. He wanted the Midnights to have a set of belts while they weren't the World Tag Team Champions. So this was all about keeping Stan and Bobby at the top of the pecking order without necessarily keeping them with the top belts. And, of course, he could get away with it around this point because the fuck? I mean, look at the tag scene in 87. This is like one of the hottest periods for tag team wrestling. Now, of course, things didn't pan out with Rude and Bull as the world champions, so that whole thing kind of went to hell in a handbasket. But with Ronnie eventually being slated for a run with the world title later in 87, Barry being positioned for a big singles run later on, obviously those guys were only temporary as a tag team, so this kind of worked out in the end. And it ended up being a nice transition going into the Great American Bash Tour for 87, which we still haven't heard much about on these TV shows, but I'm sure they'll start airing vignettes for it eventually. But that was Crockett TV for the week. And then we bounce over to World Class, which was the second week of the Parade of Champions card, at least the tape delay schedule. We got a lot of the prelim material that aired last time. The feature bout from last week was the six-man tag with the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, and that was essentially the only thing of note on the entire program. Here, in addition to the Kerry Flair title match, they also aired the mixed tag with Sunshine and Chris Adams versus Jimmy Garvin and Precious, and it made for a much better program, getting to see more of the upper mid-card main event level matches. Still a shorter show than normal, but things flew by a lot quicker this week as a result. We had another opening prelim match. Chick Donovan wrestled Hacksaw Butch Reed, which was good enough curtain jerker for the program. Much like how last week's opening match had JYD and the Missing Link that just stunk to high heaven. Watching this match go down made me want to go back and check out the entire tape library of Mid-South Wrestling from like 83 to 86. Love me some Butch Reed. What a great mean bully heel that guy was. And still at the same time, he was a good babyface too. Great in both roles. But, just a simple underneath match where Reed worked over Donovan for a while. He used the power game to flex and show off to everybody. Loved all the subtle trash talk jabs. Donovan made a short comeback toward the end after getting dumped to the floor. And after Reed cut him off coming off the ropes with a kick to the face, he gave Donovan an overhead press slam, and then he hit a running shoulder tackle off the ropes for the 3 count. And then to flex even more, he struck a double bicep pose at the camera. Now at this point, Reed was all in with the heel run, and there were usually tie-overs with work he was doing in other territories, so I imagine this was still at the point where Reed was working heel in Mid-South with Watts. I mean, it's summer of 83, so... Oh, crap, I'm blanking now on what he would have been doing on Mid-South TV during this time. I think he still would have been teaming with Hacksaw Duggan, who was also still heel by this point, because they didn't split off until a little later on when Jim turned face. Regardless, mostly a showcase piece for him. He did a little bit of work in Dallas, and granted, a lot of it was infrequent to begin with. I think they were doing the thing with him here in the Iceman at one point before they just kind of dropped that and never mentioned it again. They shot TV angles with them, and I don't think we ever saw the blow-off. Can't remember if they ever revisit that at any point, but this is just a way to get Butch Reed on the card, because he was a big deal. And especially for this period in the business. And with that only being about 6 or 7 minutes in total, that took us to the World Heavyweight Championship match with Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair. Not entirely sure why they didn't air this as the closing match in the program, but surely took up a bulk of the remainder of the show. We even got the grand entrances for both guys beforehand. They gave Kerry a little fanfare when he came out, sporting the blue ring jacket in honor of David. I think he had a rose with him too. And, well, obviously, first and foremost, this is an extremely important match, not just in the context of this show overall, but in the context of wrestling as a whole. We've covered the story of David on the channel. I don't really want to bore you with the details now. You know, we talked about it a lot with the world-class reviews beforehand. Nevertheless, it's a title match that signified the honor of David, who was originally slated to have a run with the belt, I truly believe. Some people have tried to dispute it over the years, but I, for one, believe that they were actually going to have David get a run with the NWA World Heavyweight title, had things actually gone according to plan. But this was also a title match that signified the bragging rights for Kerry after getting screwed over in a previous title encounter with Flair from 2 years ago. And we talked about that when they showed the VTR a couple weeks back. This was a scenario where, regardless of what the intent was, whether or not they wanted to put the world title on Kerry to begin with, you really couldn't not have Kerry win here. I know that's a double negative, but in this environment, under these circumstances, given everything surrounding the current situation, if you did anything except put the title on Kerry here, my God, these people would have rioted for weeks after the show was over. They'd have burned the fucking stadium to the ground. And this is one of those matches where me sitting here and talking about the particulars of what actually happened, it's all subjective. It's been a while since I've seen this match again, so I was kind of immersed in everything that was going on. Wasn't really taking a whole lot of notes. In retrospect, the match really isn't remembered for being an instant classic like the Flair Steamboat matches or the Flair Sting match from the '88 Clash of Champions. The work rate wasn't the important factor here. The finish is what people came to see. They came to see Kerry Von Erich win the big one on behalf of his brother. And, you know, the more I think about it, these are the kinds of stories that always put into perspective the biggest problem with modern wrestling today. When the marks get so hung up on how good or bad a match is based on the moves, instead of what actually matters in the context of a wrestling match, what makes it unique, what makes it important, you know, their perspective is so skewed because they're coming at it from one outlook instead of trying to look at the overall picture. You know, it's one of those things. All 30,000 people in attendance for this thing. Nobody gave a fuck about the moves the guys did. No one was popping to see Flair do a 630 splash off the fucking top rope. No one was popping for suicide topes or corkscrew planchas. They didn't care. People were cheering when Kerry was in control. They were booing when Flair was trying to cheat. And when Kerry was in trouble, the fans were unanimously behind him. Just like they were watching their hometown football team. And when Kerry rolled up Flair at the end, and he pinned his shoulders for the 3 count, good God, that place came unglued. I haven't heard a crowd reaction like that in... I don't know if I've ever heard a crowd reaction like that. Period. I mean, the packed stadium did it justice, but man, oh man, was it deafening. And this wasn't a case where they glossed over it afterwards. They stayed on it for a good 5 to 6 minutes. The family was out there celebrating with Kerry, as were a lot of the locker room babyfaces. They presented him with the yellow rose, the jacket, the whole gamut. You know, he wrapped up the title in the Texas flag and carried it out with him while he was greeted by his mom and dad in the crowd. It's one of those moments that you can't really break down in just a simple 5-minute conversation just because of all the significance surrounding the moment. Because that's what this was. It was more than just a wrestling match, ma'am. It was history. It was an iconic moment for wrestling worldwide. You know, and while the title reign for Kerry didn't last all that long, it didn't need to. This was about the here and now, the moment, in that given period. You know, we talk so often anymore about how meaningless belts are in wrestling, because everybody has one to some degree. They're all just props at this point. But then you look back at moments like this, and you realize just how imperative it was to make belts prestigious. They could have had Kerry just beat Flair in a standard match with no titles at stake. But this was about Kerry fulfilling David's story to become world champion, to bring the gold home to Texas, the most important world heavyweight championship in the business, and beating the top wrestler in the world to do it. That was the bigger story. Kerry just simply beating Flair wasn't enough. They needed this title switch to solidify the whole deal. And when you read about it, when you listen to people talk about the importance of this moment in history, it still rings true to this day. It's something wrestling historians truly need to study if they want to understand how to truly appreciate a time when this business was taken seriously. Back before it got completely neutered and destroyed. You go back to relive moments like this. Not just to see the title change and see the reaction, but to understand how and why we got to this point. Everything that led to where we are now. How it factored into the title switch. That's the key. And I'm not trying to be all sentimental about this, but it's hard to review this stuff without just bringing up the history. Again, you talk about the match in a nutshell. Was it good? Was it bad? I don't know. Who gives a fuck? Seriously. What do people remember? The end result. Harry Von Erich standing there with the World Heavyweight title, being showered with the reception from the fans. So I love this, obviously. You'd be a fucking moron to hate it. I mean, Meltzer didn't give it 5 stars, probably because it didn't take place in the Tokyo Dome. But when you actually talk about real, legitimate 5-star matches in wrestling, these are the matches you ought to be throwing into that conversation, man. People that still talk about this stuff 30-something years after the fact because of its reputation in history. Those are real 5-star matches. It's not about the work rate. It's not about the moves. It's about the moments they create. It's about how it cycles back to history. How people remember it years after the fact. And whether or not it still holds true. And that's the other problem too, There are a lot of historical moments in wrestling that kind of get ruined because of talent reputation, because of tragic moments that happen. The obvious go-to is the Chris Benoit story. People don't like to talk about him, and he's sort of been erased from memory in a lot of people's opinions. But moments like this still stand. They're universal. Whether or not you watch stuff like this in 1984, 1994, 2004, 2014, 2024, 2034, it'll still live on. And people will still come back to this moment and say, this was a truly memorable historic moment in wrestling. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind too when people talk about what are the true iconic legendary moments in wrestling. I still calculate moments like this. I would put this above anything else. Is it the single greatest moment in wrestling history? No, of course it's not. But is it one of the top 10 or 15? Arguably so. And while I'm still trying to figure out why they didn't air this as the main event over the mixed tag, well, I guess that would be a good way to transition to talking about the mixed tag, wouldn't it? First, we must cover the Gino Hernandez promo that happened before the opening bell. What a fucking Dynamite promo that guy cut. Doing himself no favors making friends with the babyfaces or the heels upon his return. Now, technically, Gino Hernandez would have been working in Texas when it was still under the Big Time Wrestling umbrella. Still wasn't technically called World Class Wrestling by that point. So, I would say this was more of a return slash re-debut, a reacquaintance, I guess. And he came back decked out in a full suit, looking like $1,000,000. Standing there saying that you can't have the greatest wrestling card in the world without having Gino Hernandez on the show. The handsome half-breed, as he referred to himself as. You know, when he takes shots at all four talents in the ring, including all the girls, saying that Garvin and Adams should be on their toes because Gino wants the winner of whoever wins this match. Like I said, not even trying to be a heel that pretended to get along with the other heels. He was all in for Gino here. And it was definitely a shocking appearance. Didn't overstay its welcome. Just came in to let everybody know, hey, I'm back, and I'm here to stay. And, well, again, it's another one of those sad cases where people tend to focus on more of the personal life aspect rather than talking about what Gino actually brought to the ring as a talent. The whole controversy over his death in '86, the particulars of the investigation and why it was dropped, the unsolved mysteries surrounding all of that, people tend to focus on that a lot. And it is sort of an interesting conversation. We still hear varying degrees of opinion from the boys over how that all went down. I mean, you listen to 7 interviews, you're going to get 7 different takes. I haven't read up on the story in years, so I'm not one to try to go into a deep dive on the whole conversation. I'll just say Jim Cornette always tells better stories than most people, so if you want a good breakdown of the career of Gino, I'd encourage you to go check out his podcast. There's your shameless plug, I guess. Getting back to the mixed tag, after we just spent 5 minutes diverting all our attention away from what everybody came to see for this match, we get the match. And, well, yeah, remember how I've been insinuating that the only thing people ever cared about in this feud was getting to see the girls fight? Well, guess what the people popped for the most during this match? The cat fight. Took a while to get there, but when the girls locked horns for the first time in this match, it was quite the scene. You had Adams and Garvin out there for the first few minutes doing stuff. The crowd was lukewarm. And then Adams tagged in Sunshine for the first time, and the crowd all shat themselves as Precious gets yanked in the ring hard way. Great shot where Sunshine tried to give the catapult into the corner to Precious, and she came nowhere close to making contact with it. That was the point where every hardcore fan woke up and said, yeah, I guess this shit is fake after all. That's how horrible the spot looked. And the cat fight was short-lived, because then the boys got back in there and did a few more spots for a while. Adams got busted open here at one point. And then Sunshine tagged back in. Garvin actually cut her off at the ankles to try and hold her down so Precious could get in some cheap shots. That also led to some egregiously bad camera shots where Precious was, cough, cough, slapping Sunshine with open palm strikes. And, kindly put, she missed about 90% of them entirely. And then sometime after that, they were showing the girls fighting at one corner of the ring and completely missed Garvin getting the pin on Adams. But again, the only thing people really paid to see were the Whammon get into a fight. Precious was hideously bad here. It was kind of amusing. I think I see why they kept her as a valet for most of Jimmy's career. And that was probably a good call. But the heels kept the onslaught going afterwards. Precious came in and smacked Sunshine in the back of the head with her purse. It did not appear to be loaded, but Sunshine charged her shortly thereafter and kept the fight going. And after the heels powdered, the crowd continued to blow a gasket. It was a fun match, if you remove the fact that everything Precious did was downright horrible in the ring, and you accept the fact that nobody cared about a goddamn thing the boys did. It was definitely worth checking out. But again, man, the entire show can be summed up in one easy take. The NWA World Heavyweight title match. That was the bread and butter of the entire Parade of Champions event in 1984. Even with all the other surrounding feuds, this is what people mainly came to see. And that's perfectly all right, because at the end of the day, it delivered on all accounts. It's something that I think any wrestling fan should go out of their way to watch, regardless of whether or not you grew up during this era and you were a fan of this kind of wrestling. If you want to truly understand the art of wrestling and why this profession used to be taken seriously, these are the kinds of moments you need to go back and look for. Yes, we know wrestling is a work, and we really can't do anything to convince ourselves to believe otherwise. But even in these moments, man, you go back and you watch shows like this, you understand the importance of kayfabe and why it was so important for the boys to protect the business back in the day. It's to preserve moments like this. We talk about how wrestling has evolved, blah, blah. Well, yeah, in many cases it has. For good or bad, depending on how you view it. But even someone like me, knowing that we'll probably never get moments like this in wrestling ever again, it doesn't mean you still can't get emotionally invested in history. Even when you know the fallout, even when you know what happens in the timeline afterwards, you can still live for moments like the David Memorial event in May of 1984, the Parade of Champions at Texas Stadium. Talk about the show to this day. And even though I wasn't born by the time this happened, I still value it. Here in my mid-30s. So there's your wrestling lesson for the day. And as we kind of wrap things up here, going into the Monday show, we'll have the Retro Raw and the SmackDown report going. And next weekend, is it next weekend? Let me get my calendar up here. Where's that icon down here somewhere? There it is. All right, so today is the 19th of May. So we have... so the go-home show for the Double or Nothing pay-per-view will be next Wednesday, and then on the 28th we'll have Double or Nothing, and I think WWE is running the Night of Champions show on the 27th, am I right? Is it the Clash of Champions or the Night of Champions? I can never remember. Let's see here. Night of Champions. That is May 27th at the Jeddah Superdome. So we're going to have a lot to cover that weekend. I might need to do some modification there. That might be another one of those Monday shows where we leave out the SmackDown report and we just do the Retro Raw and then save everything else for the 2 pay-per-view recaps, because I don't know, man. Those might be some lengthy talks that we're going to be dealing with there. That's a WWE and an AEW pay-per-view. So we'll see what happens. In any case, I think we'll wrap it up there. So thanks for watching, everybody, and we will be back on Monday. Take care. Peace out.